This show is a Rochester podcast production. For advertising information, please contact us at rochesterpodcastnetwork@gmail.com.
Welcome to another episode of No One Knows, the Science of Health and Fitness. I am your host, the bearded bullshit buster and swolly scientist, and today we have a reoccurring guest, second time on the show, very, very special guest, Gabrielle Fundaro, PhD, human nutrition, and one of the leading educators in gut health. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. And thanks again for just such a nice intro. I need to have the podcast hosts write my bios and stuff like that because it sounds so fancy.
I made sure to call you an educator this time instead of an expert. So
I appreciate it.
So today we're actually going to talk about something a little bit different, though. Last time we really focused on nutrition and the microbiome, things of that nature. But today we're going to go over coaching and behavior modification. So explain that to our viewers.
Yeah, so really this kind of goes back to when I was more officially an educator. So when I was still finishing my PhD program, I knew that I wanted to teach. And I had the opportunity to complete a fellowship in pedagogy, which is the science of teaching and learning. Okay. So I was actually one of the first group to go through that program and the first graduate of that program, the graduate teaching scholars out of Virginia Tech. And part of that was learning how to encourage people to learn how to learn. Right. And really, when we're talking about learning how to learn, that is more self-directed, independent behavior modification.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so going forward, when I was working as an assistant professor, part of my duties were to have meetings with students for advising. And if anyone has been through higher ed or even, in high school, they did it, you meet with an advisor and quite often they just pretty much tell you, these are the courses that you have to take in this order, and then you just go do those things. And I thought, well, there's got to be a better way to serve these students, especially because I was working with students in an open access institution. So they were coming from a range of academic backgrounds and, with variable preparation, just like the way that we're working with a variety of clients who may have very diverse backgrounds and experiences with weight modification, diet, and exercise. Mm-hmm. And so what I found was the concept of appreciative advising. So that's more of a collaborative approach between the advisor and the student. It's a discussion that helps the student to identify their strengths, their past successes, challenges, their goals. And it's one way to work with students who are a little bit ambivalent or maybe undecided about their major or, their path going forward, especially, working in STEM fields. Those are challenging courses. And when students hit anatomy and physiology, they're like, do I really want to be a nurse or a physical therapist or whatever? And I was able to carry that forward when I started coaching. And that's when I thought, okay, how can I make this even more applicable? Because I saw that it wasn't just about, helping a client in the short term with what am I supposed to eat? Right. But long term, how do I adapt to my changing external environment to maintain whatever success I've had? And that's when I came to learn about motivational interviewing, which probably a lot of people are familiar with. And motivational interviewing is really sort of the nutrition version of appreciative advising. So it is a collaborative approach based on communication skills. There's an exchange of information. It's not just unidirectional coach to client. And that does similarly help clients who might be, ambivalent, confused, kind of questioning which direction that they want to go in, and helps to increase self-reliance rather than, constant reliance on the coach.
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, and immediately, there's 4 or 5 things that I picked out in what you said that I want to comment on. And I think education is a huge part of it, right? And I think it's inherently one of the biggest downfalls of clients coming into coaching situations or personal trainers, right? And it's the difficulty, the amount of time we have to spend to educate somebody, whether they truly want to be educated. And there's a little bit of a disconnect there because fad dieting and gimmicks and all these things like that wouldn't be nearly as popular if people actually valued learning or educating themselves, right? And if they put in the time to learn the real science behind things, they wouldn't fall for these, right? And it's, and I want to, the other point I want to bring up here is something both Mike Israetel and Spencer Nadosky talked about when they were on the podcast recently. If you haven't seen that episode, go check it out now. And it's why obesity, likely in their opinion, will never be solved through traditional means of diet and exercise. And it's, David Mathis and myself, we were really pushing the education side, and they brought up a very astute observation, and they're like, you know what, from about 5 years old, a kid can pick out what good foods are and what bad foods are. And if we're being educated so at such an early age, right, eventually education isn't the answer, because if people already know what's good and bad, they inherently make the choice to look the opposite way, because doing the things that we shouldn't do make people feel good, like eating the foods that we shouldn't be eating, or eating them in at least surplus, or drinking or smoking. These things taste great, and it will likely, in their opinion, take a major shift in societal values to be able to treat obesity. And if that societal change doesn't happen, the end result is likely going to be through some sort of designer drug or genetic modifications through CRISPRs or something like that. So, I mean, there's a lot to go over there. It's back to the other point you bring up, like the approach that I take from a coach is education, like education, because this has to be a lifestyle, right? Even when we look at, we'll say like the Whole30, the Whole30 diet, I would say is objectively better than some of the other detoxes or diets out there, just because it really pushes whole foods, nutrition, food volume, things of that nature. But inherently, that diet is still designed to fail with a client because it's 30 days. What is the sustainability there? There is none, right? Like what is the end result after the 30 days? Like you're left with no place to go after that.
Yeah. And the other thing with diets like that, any sort of restrictive diet, and I'm so glad that you brought up like good foods and bad foods. I think that part of the problem is that we are addressing this from a nutrition and exercise standpoint. And we sort of view it as, okay, maybe education isn't very effective for weight loss or weight management because people sort of know what they should or shouldn't eat and they do it anyway.
Right.
Or with Whole30, we have sort of foods that are off limits or on the plan, and you just stick with the foods that are on the plan. It only works short term because we don't have a long-term goal in mind. Mm-hmm. And I think what these are both getting at, and what is sort of overlooked, is that there's this whole other aspect of personality and emotion. And, when we're talking about why people eat foods, some of it is it's because they taste good, but it also could be because they're stressed, because they're feeling emotional, because they're lonely. And we don't address those aspects. Or, they have an abstinence violation effect. So they've eaten a food that's bad. Yeah. And then they think, well, fuck it. It's the whole day is ruined. I'm just going to eat the rest of it, because they have this misconception about, their lack of self-control. And so those, I think, are the areas that we really need to look into, are helping people cope with their emotions and with stress. Mm-hmm. And it's really a mental health approach more so than just diet and exercise.
Oh yeah, I would totally when we start talking about the stress and how it makes someone feel, it's no longer just a nutritional good versus bad, right? Or quote unquote healthy versus unhealthy diets. It's something mental at that point. And I mean, we have so much talk today in mental health awareness, and people don't realize how much of like nutrition, diet, exercise goes hand in hand with someone's mental state. I was having a conversation with a client just earlier today. She this is the first time she's ever hired a trainer. And, we were talking about how it's very difficult for her because she's tried before and she only loses a pound or two or something like that and gets frustrated. What am I doing wrong? You're not doing anything wrong, right? Like short term, someone can look at, I only lost 1 pound a week. So 4 pounds for a month. What am I doing? You're not doing anything wrong. You're making great progress, right? It's just looking at it in micro versus macro, right? Short term versus long term. For someone to say, I've only lost 4 pounds this month, I'm doing something wrong. Well, hang on a second. Let's extrapolate this over the course of a year, 52 weeks in a year. If I told you could lose 52 pounds in a year, you're going to be ecstatic. You're gonna be very happy with that. But in the short term, she would look at something like that and be like, in exactly what you said, like the fuck it mode, where she goes, well, I'm not making any progress. This isn't really worth it. I'm just going to eat something because I'm stressed out about it, and it's not working anyway. So I might as well enjoy the food, right? And that right there is a definite indicator that it's more of a mental issue, right? It's the behavior modification that needs to be addressed, not her actual diet or her activity level, because you're making progress. It's just not what you expected.
And that's really key with motivational interviewing, and kind of gets to, it's sort of like a multifaceted approach. Like we have to, talk about mental health, and then education is still very important because, I think even assuming that we know what we're supposed to eat or what we're not supposed to eat, that might even be kind of an oversimplification. It's almost like abstinence only sex ed. Right. We know that that's totally ineffective. It doesn't do anything to improve, rates of teen pregnancy. And so if we take an abstinence only approach to food, it's going to have the same failure rate. That's sort of my theory. I don't know if that, we know that the long-term weight management, statistics are so poor. Yeah. So yeah, it's sort of a similar failure rate. But when we talk about, one of the big aspects of motivational interviewing is making sure that we have shared expectations. So it's like we have a role, a responsibility as coaches to educate people about safe rates of weight loss and what to expect, and make sure that they buy into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, needs versus wants, right? I literally just saw a post the other day. I'm not gonna mention any names. Another local trainer in the area who was gloating about the fact that his client just lost 16 pounds in a week, right? And I'm looking at his current body weight after the 16-pound loss, and I'm just thinking to myself, this is a coach who does not have the best interest for the client in mind, because he's caving to what the client wants instead of what the client actually needs, right? 16 pounds a week, yes, short term, that client's going to feel great about that, but what is that going to do to your leptin, ghrelin levels, and your energy and everything else that goes with it? I mean, we know that sort of rate of weight loss typically ends tragically for most people. And in a situation like that, you really have to strike a good balance, right? And it's the abstinence thing. I think you hit the nail on the head on that one, right? Comparing abstinence with sex to dieting. Again, we know the statistics for dieting are horrible, and when we make them more strict, more unsustainable, I mean, you're increasing your failure rate tremendously. And with this same client this morning that I was working with, when I showed her the acceptable recommended high glycemic foods from the RP Diet 2.0 book, and it had cereal, and it had Pop-Tarts, and it had low fat candy and all, and she's like, oh, so this is a list of things I can't eat because this is really bad for me. I'm like, no, absolutely not the case. These are actually foods that if you want to enjoy these things, this is the preferred time to have it post workout. And she's like, you're kidding me, right? And I was like, no, like, I was like, believe me, I'm not saying like go out and binge on these things, but if you want to enjoy these things, here is a preferred or recommended time to consume these higher glycemic foods, right? And that in moderation, and if we're still in a deficit, you can become healthy for eating these things.
Yeah. And it's the same way, when we talk about sex education, people are going to eat food, people are going to have sex. People are going to eat a whole range of food. They're going to want to have all sorts of different types of sex. If we tell them, don't have sex because sex has all of these risks, at some point they're going to want to have sex. And if we've not given them any sort of tools or information, education, or expectations, and been transparent about the risks and the benefits, they're going to go in having no idea what to do and maybe put themselves at risk. And so it's the same thing with food, that we can say nothing is off limits. Here are the pros and cons of these various approaches. And then let's work together on reasonable expectations, ways to overcome obstacles. That seems to me, it just seems so intuitive to me that would be the most sustainable way to go, rather than this is all you can eat for the rest of your life, and focusing so myopically on what's most effective for weight loss. Well, really, in my opinion, I don't think that our habits between weight loss and weight maintenance should be so different, because what happens then is when we get to the weight maintenance phase, now we have to establish an entirely new set of habits that are totally different from what we did in weight loss. It was hard enough the first time around. The second time around, we have to break the old ones. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I try to keep things fairly consistent, obviously with, energy intake different, but the rest of it, it's not, I really don't subscribe to the idea of like cheat meals or on and off, like off limits foods and on limits foods, as the silly opposite there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel so redundant, like a broken record when I talk about Mark Hobb, a nutritional professor, and his 10-week case study. But I mean, like, it is profoundly astounding to me. I mean, I know why more people don't know about it, because it's bad for business for people to know about stuff like that. But I mean, like, Mark Hobbs, right? 10-week case study, nothing but Mountain Dew, Doritos, Oreos, zebra cakes, the worst of the worst foods that inherently will make you fat and you can't lose weight for it. But because he kept himself in a deficit, lost nearly 30 pounds in the 10 weeks, eating things that you're told you can't eat, and improved every health marker across the board in his testing before to after the diet, right? And I get worked up about stuff like this, and it shows. But two points I want to bring up with you. One is expectations, and I will go into that briefly. But first, I want to address something else, and it's people cannot. They know someone who's educated, but they can't tell the difference between someone who's educated and someone who's educated and full of shit, right? When we look at people like Dr. Oz, right, or any of these other PhDs or MDs, specifically it tends more to be MDs than PhDs, right? So a client of mine last week recently sent me like 10 photos of a conference that like a health and wellness conference that she was at, that tens of thousands of people were in attendance, and it was this MD that I looked up I zoomed in on his credentials, right? What his titles were, and sure enough, he's an MD that has no formal education in nutrition, but he's someone that's saying you have to be gluten free, you have to do intermittent fasting, you should be skipping breakfast. These foods are bad for you. You can't eat these foods. He doesn't endorse keto, but hey, you know what? I do have some ketone aids you can buy, right? You should be doing detoxes. Here is a probiotic that I can sell you that you need to take. And oh, by the way, with this probiotic, I'm also going to give you the gut health detox. So please tell me how those things, if they actually worked, aren't counterintuitive. You're gonna give yourself a probiotic to help increase healthy gut microbiome, but then you're still gonna detox it at the same time. Like how does that happen, right? And like he's like just these incredibly like simplifications of black and white. This is what you need to do. This is what you can't do. And I'm having this conversation with my client, and she's there with like 8 other girls, and like she's telling me how everyone else around her is writing all this down, and like this is the key, and absolutely loving it. And they're taking what he's saying as facts simply because he's an MD, but he has, I mean, from some of the things I've said and told you and what I've seen in the slides that he's presented, has absolutely no business talking about exercise or nutrition with anybody. Like, it doesn't matter that he's an MD, he's grossly miscompetent and underqualified to give that advice.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's so strange, too, because it seems that this realm is one where people feel very comfortable sort of overstepping. You know, like no one is going out like making extrapolated claims about quantum physics or, you know, like, I don't know, cardiopulmonary surgery. You know, like we are not overstepping and saying like this is how you suture. Like that's not in my scope. And so I don't understand. Maybe it's because people are so familiar, you know, everyone eats. And so it's like the same way that when a person may have a disease and they have firsthand experience with that disease and then become, you know, an educator about that disease, regardless of whether or not they really understand the pathophysiology. So it's almost this familiarity breeds maybe undue confidence that they can speak about these things. Or having, you know, like an understanding of the human body, I guess it's easy for them to sort of take that a step further and say, well, I understand the human body, and so I'm going to make, you know, claims about it. And that's like just assuming that they don't know any better. I think it could also potentially be that they do know that they don't know what they're talking about, but, you know, they just keep Googling stuff and it just keeps working. I don't know. I think that's a Rick and Morty quote.
Yeah.
Someone sent me. I was like, that's
Dude,
so
I love
true.
Rick and Morty. That's such a good show. But yeah, I mean, like it's not to understate education or the value of it, but it's how, like, how do people discern the difference between the people that are absolutely full of shit and the people that actually know their shit, right? Like, for me, like what I always say is like, cite your sources, right? Cite your sources, just like you're in school. Look at the level of evidence, right? Like, is it rat testing or is it human testing? Is it cohort? Is it ward? Is it meta study? Is it systematic review? Like, all these things have different levels of strength, right? Has it been peer reviewed? Is it accepted by other I shouldn't say, well, professionals, yeah, but other experts in the field, or are they just a one-off person that makes radical claims? For most people, they never consider any of those things. They just say, oh, they're a PhD, or oh, they're an MD, or they're on TV, or they have a big following. They must know what they're talking about, and it's like, I mean, I guess I'll just ask you, how with your line of work or clients that you've dealt with, what's the approach that you take in trying to educate someone who thinks that they have an education, but it's very wrong, or they've been misled on topics?
So it kind of depends on, you know, who it is. If it's someone who is a practitioner, sometimes if I have the time and energy, I'll just say, hey, actually, this doesn't seem to be the case. It's actually X, Y, and Z. And that has actually led to cool podcasts that I've been on. And, I try not to do it from a place of criticism and judgment and animosity. I really want to build some bridges, because what I found is that, we have more in common with the other side than we probably realize. And if we can find some common ground, we can have an open dialogue, and then everyone benefits. Then I can see where you're coming from and understand why you might think that, and then have a more productive conversation. Mm-hmm. If I'm working with a client who's been misinformed about something, I'm fortunate that most people are coming to me because they already kind of feel like they've been misinformed, right. And they're like, hey, this seems fucky to me, like what's going on? But I have a few times had clients that, are working with perhaps a trainer, or they've come from someone else that has given them some misinformation, like, oh, here, take the, you need this fat burner, or you need to do intermittent fasting. And I think it's of the utmost importance that we meet clients where they are, that, it's not my job to change their mind. Like the way I view it is that I am someone on a podcast recently said, like, a Sherpa. I'm a navigator, right? So they're still in the driver's seat. Like, their choices, they're going to make whatever choices they're going to make long term, even if short term, they're like, yeah, I guess I'll do what you say. Long term, they're going to revert to their own choices. But I'm telling them, here's the map. We have all these different routes we can take. This one's going to be really bumpy. This is probably not the safest route to take. Here's all the pros and cons. And then GPS said to go this way, but actually we should go this other way because that's not correct. And so I'm trying to, validate their experiences. So I'm not going to say straight out, oh, that's wrong, or, that's not productive in any way. But we need to be able to validate and empathize with them just within that experience. Like, oh, wow, it must be really tough to have those gastrointestinal symptoms, or to feel frustrated that you can't lose weight, without saying, yes, you have leaky gut, because that's just not an accurate statement. Or, yes, you have a food sensitivity. Yeah. So, validating without agreeing is kind of a soft skill to work on. And then providing them with, just enough information, and then still letting them make the decision.
Yeah. You actually, now that you say that, I remember sharing that post that you made where the word there is, to recognize and agree or empathize that this person has experienced this. And, you catch more bees with honey. You can take the approach, be like, no, you're a fucking idiot. Like, who could ever believe that, right? What is that going to do to that person's confidence or willingness to want to work with you and take that approach, right? It's like, it's really like any sort of zealot, or like, it's like religion debates where people are adamantly like, no, like, this is the way, you're an idiot for not believing what I believe, right? You're never going to win an argument putting somebody down. Hearing somebody and understanding what they're saying and validating their experience, but then being like, okay, like, I understand that happened. It's take it as a learning experience, and now this is how we're gonna move forward. There are quite some, difficult things, right? Like recently, earlier this month, I started working with a new client online, and when I told her she could eat something besides lean ground turkey, she was ecstatic. And I was like, hang on a second. I was like, tell me a little bit more about the diet. And she's like, well, like, I hired this guy online because he looked great and seemed to know what he was talking about. But like, she went on to elaborate with me that the only type of protein that he said was acceptable for her to eat was turkey. No chicken, no, didn't matter what, like, quality, leanness of beef, right? She wasn't allowed to have corn or carrots or any other type of fruit or vegetable that was perceived to be high in sugar, because sugar is bad for you, right? And like, it was... Yeah. She came to me in a position where she's like, I can't eat this way anymore, right? And that's like, again, we talked about that. When you're putting someone into a place of saying like, this is what you can eat, this is what you can't, this is how it has to be, and this is what we're going to do, that person couldn't learn from that situation. It's giving the fish versus learning how to fish. And she approached me simply because she couldn't handle the diet anymore that she was given. And it's one of those things, like you said, typically, you have situations where people come to you where they start to feel like this can't be right? And it was the same situation for me. And when I started to explain to her, like, hey, like, no food is off limits. We just have to play around with portion control and moderations and things like that. It was amazing, the turnaround, right? Like in the first 4 weeks, she lost 8 pounds, and given her body weight, that is because, again, not naming any names, she's 200 plus, right? So losing 2 pounds a week is totally normal at that body weight, So, I mean, it will go down over time as she loses more weight, but coming from a place where she was like, I can't do this anymore, to like, wow, this is way easier than I thought. But before I forget, the expectations, the expectations I wanted to bring up, and I'll share an experience with you. And it was a client that I worked with for a year, a female client that lost 85 pounds over the course of a year.
Wow.
85 pounds. And she refused to weigh herself over the entire time. And after the year, she finally got the courage to weigh herself. And when she did, she told me how much weight she lost. I was like, oh my God, like, that's amazing. That's ecstatic. And instead, I was expecting a positive moment out of it, right? And instead, she's like, she's like, I'm sobbing. I'm absolutely sobbing. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, tears of happiness? She's like, no. She's like, I expected my body to look so much more, like, so differently at an arbitrary set scale number. And because it wasn't what she perceived that weight to look like, in her head, she had failed. Right. And again, we come back to it being something mental, right? It's not the diet that's not working. It's something isn't clicking on mental health part of the equation, but it's the expectation. Someone who lost 85 pounds in the course of a year, that was still a failure to her, because the weight that she ended at, she expected a totally different composition for her body. And her reaction at that point, she's like, I just want to give up. I want to quit, because if I put in this much work and I'm still not happy with my body, what's the point of continuing to go on? Like, how much longer do I have to do this, right? And again, we're looking at someone who's only thinking short term, right? Like, how much longer do I have to do this? So, to paraphrase, she's looking at like a hard date. Like, is it another 6 months? Is it another year? And the reality, this has to be a lifestyle, right? Like you said, it's not like, oh, we're maintenance, so now it changes. This is something that needs to be consistent, where it can be flexible and, I don't want to say self-sustaining, but more natural way of eating for someone to sustain those long-term success. But I mean, like, how do you not, as a trainer, be crushed by something like that, right? Like, in that situation, I guess, like, how would you broach that situation?
Oh, you know what? This is such a great real life example of something that I stress so much, that I think people don't see, they're not able to experience it. But what happens is, we often think that when I reach X number on the scale, I will be happy. Or when my body looks a certain way, I will be happy. I will like my body. I will love myself conditionally if I weigh this much or I look this way. And it's the other way around. That when our motivation for losing weight is purely aesthetic, and this is something that's actually in the literature, aesthetics versus a health focus, the long-term success is much lower. And we have to think about it in terms of not so much, people are thinking in terms of motivation, more or less motivation. So I have like a motivation meter, it goes up and down. We need to be thinking of it laterally, that we need to shift from extrinsic or external motivation. I need to look a certain way because I don't like my body and I'm trying to avoid the negative feelings that I get when I look at my body, to intrinsic motivation. I'm moving because I enjoy this. I'm eating this way because I enjoy it, because it makes me feel good. Or I'm moving and eating this way because I am a parent, or I'm a sibling, or I'm a role model, and it's part of my identity to be a good role model to those around me. So it's part of my identity. It's got nothing to do with I need to have a smaller body so that I can accept myself. It has everything to do with I'm engaging in these health-seeking behaviors because they're of benefit to me and those around me in terms of my health, my longevity, the amount of energy that I have available to give to other people. So what she experienced there was the expectation that at a given weight, she would like herself. And she didn't, because that's probably something that wasn't, at the forefront of her mind of like, we can, there's nothing wrong with having a smaller, having a weight loss as a goal or something that we accept can happen as a result of these behaviors. But one of the things that I really love is and it's sort of a meme, but you can't hate yourself healthy. You can't hate yourself skinny. You don't have to hate yourself to change. You can love yourself or accept yourself and still change. You can say like, this is the body that in this moment, all we have is this moment right now. We literally don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You might not actually wake up. So in this moment, you can accept yourself and be nice to yourself and still do the things that are going to be promoting your health, so that in case you wake up tomorrow, hopefully, that you'll be a little bit healthier for it. But to come at it from a place of, I don't like this body and I need to change it, and once I get to this weight, I'll be happy with it. It's the other way around, honestly, like that. And that's what I've seen in clients too, because I have some clients that I work with that we have there's no weighing unless they want to. We're not focused on weight loss as a goal. It is 100% looking at health-seeking behaviors and mental health. And the turnaround that I see in them and the growth that I see is really incredible, because some of them do go from a place of like, don't want to weigh or whatever, just eat vegetables. And then over time, they're like, I'm curious to know what's in this food. I kind of want to look at these macros, so they increase their task difficulty. They increase the complexity of what they're doing and add more tools to the toolbox without a lot of friction, without feeling like they're trudging uphill to accumulate all these habits, because it's happening organically, because they're curious and they're interested and they're having fun with the process. And I think it's very different from this sort of militaristic approach we take to fitness and nutrition, where like it has to be regimented, it has to be really uncomfortable. Yes, we can sort of enjoy the physical discomfort of a hard training bout, but we're still enjoying it, So I think that that's an area that people are not really promoting as much, because we're so focused on like the metrics and arguing about like, which diet is best or something. Well, long term, they're all bad. Like the adherence is bad for all of them. Yeah. So maybe we should focus on some other things instead.
So, and again, getting someone to the place that they enjoy it or they want to become educated, much higher success rate. So let's pose this question: how do we combat, or how do we change, or how do we have the behavior modification when someone says, "I hate exercising," or "I hate the healthy food," right? How do we change that? Because I've worked with plenty of clients where not plenty, but one specifically comes to mind where I would physically have to take weights away from her because her disdain for working out was so great. She's like, well, I don't want to wait because if I get through my reps and my sets faster, I don't have to continue working. I'm like, that's not how this works, right? But she genuinely disliked physical exercise because it was hard, so much to the point. how would, like, what do you do in that situation where someone honestly or genuinely seems like they just can't stand doing it? Like, what do you do in that situation?
So I actually, I have a client who is interested, really just weight loss was a, a big part of the goal for health reasons. So there were some, cardiometabolic risk factors associated, but we didn't look at it like, okay, this is what we're going to, aim to lose every week and so on and so forth. It was all focused still on health seeking behaviors. Well, obviously, exercise is one version of a health seeking behavior, but this person was like, they don't want to do exercise being structured, planned physical activity. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to make a person do something that they hate, because like once we stop working together, they're probably going to stop doing it. And my idea is that I want people to, when they fly the nest, they keep going and like get better and come back to me and say, look, I've made more progress. And this has actually happened. And it was like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It was 6 months later, this person was like, hey, I did all the stuff for the last 6 months independently. So it's great when people can do that. So in this case, I just said, well, what do you like to do? Because this is something that I used to do with my students when they said, I hate this major, I hate these classes, I'm miserable. And I'm like, well, what do you do in your free time? And they would be like, I play video games. Okay, well, if we just stop there and say, oh, well, video games, can't make any money off that. Well, okay, video games. Well, do you like computers? Do you like learning about how video games are made? So on and so forth. Or I detail cars. Oh, are you super into cars? Oh, yeah, they're awesome. I like to work on cars in my free time. So let's find the other things that to you don't feel like work, but are still actually lucrative. It's still actually work. And so maybe this was like really bad for business when I was, in exercise science, because I had students that went off to computer science, business school, like some of them went off to trade school, because I'd rather have a person enjoy something different that might be a little bit lateral to what's the most efficient. But if that's going to be lasting for them, it's going to be more effective long term. And so when I'm working with people who are like, I don't like to do exercise, or I don't like to do, I don't like vegetables or whatever, I immediately shift to what do you like? And that way we can meet them there.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, like it's I would agree with that. It's one of those things where when I talk with clients that are like, they come across and like, well, like based off of my work schedule and like my activity and stuff, I only really like to eat one meal a day. And I know that's really bad. And, I need to be better about eating breakfast, but I don't like eating breakfast. And I'm just like, okay, well, that's fine. If you don't like it, don't do it. The main driving factor here is always going to be a calorie deficit. If you only like eating one big meal a day, right, that's fine. You can continue to do that. We can adopt an intermittent fasting approach and just, still, we can have a much larger meal because of that, but still at the end of the day, make sure that the total energy balance in, energy balance out is where we need it to be. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Now, we can, for weight loss purposes, fine. We can argue the minutia when it comes to performance and energy levels and things of that nature, how they're gonna, make it through. Let's say they have their big meal at night and then they go all day without eating, and the first thing they do in the morning is the fasted training where they work out, and maybe they have to do their cardio right after the resistance training because that's the only time of the day they can get it in, and then they go to work and they haven't had any. I mean, like that person's probably going to feel terrible by the end of the day. Now, will they still sustain weight loss if they're in a deficit? Absolutely. Is it the most optimal thing for health or performance? Meh, we can argue there, right? But it's health. I'll say like health and fitness, or weight loss and health. They mutually exclusive and not mutually exclusive. If you understand what I'm saying there, like they are very separate things but intertwined. It's like the opposite side of the same coin.
Yeah. And so the other great point there is that, you're bringing up some areas where that person is going to, like, what I kind of like to do is, you have a couple different approaches. Like we can say if the person is adamant about it, then okay. I mean, I'm not there to change their minds. I'm there to inform them. And so they're making an informed decision. So once they know all of the pros and cons, and they're still like, yes, I still want to do intermittent fasting, knowing that it's not optimal and I might be tired. Okay, go try it and see. And then they can see that, oh, maybe it's not such a great experience. So there, what we're talking about really are sort of the stages of the trans-theoretical model of behavior change, where we have a person in like pre-contemplation, like, I don't want to make any changes. I want to keep things exactly where they are. And during that phase, we really have to validate, like, yes, your experience is valid and the things that you want to do, you are an autonomous human being. You can make those decisions. But just to let you know, here are some other options that might be good. And then once they have some more experiences, they might get to the, contemplation stage where they're like, maybe it would be a good idea to do some other things. And you can start to identify where they're bringing that up. Like, oh yeah, I felt really tired today. Oh, okay. Well, do you want to look at some other options? So what happens over time is they start to see the value in making these changes. And it's not going to happen across the board, but I think keeping that dialogue open, like, so if you have a person who really doesn't like, and even with this client, they actually are starting to they want to make time to put in some planned exercise because they're seeing, maybe walking isn't sufficient for, cardiovascular benefit. And it's much more efficient and time effective if I do something a little bit more intense for a short period of time. But that really still has to be client led. So you're having the discussions all the time, paying close attention to when they're bringing up the things that they might want to change, and then encouraging them to continue to see value in it. Yeah. And then that can actually shift, the motivation from like, I don't like this, I'm doing it because I have to, oh, actually, this is valuable to me. This is at least useful.
Yeah, like one of the strategies I really like to take when it comes to diet, and it's just tracking or using MyFitnessPal. It doesn't necessarily have to be that app, but starting to record a diary. And when I start working with people, I actually don't give them a diet immediately. I give them the first week to I tell them, I want you to eat normally as you normally would every day. I don't want you to change anything. Do what you normally do, and I want you to record it so you can learn firsthand and you see like, oh man, like for instance, a client I just recently started working with, it's the busy season, January, everybody wants to start. And this client particularly loves like full fat milk, right? And he's like, I was like, okay, I'm not going to tell you to not drink milk. I'm not saying dairy is bad. I'm not going to tell you any of those things because it's not. What I am going to have you do, however, is I want you to scan that little barcode on the milk and pay attention to how much an actual serving size is and how many calories you're doing or taking in over the course of 1 meal, 2 meals, 3 meals. And the next time I saw him, he's like, dude, I had no idea how many calories I was taking in every single day in liquids. And he's like, I love milk. He's like, I would drink it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And, at first thought, when I became aware that I'm having milk at every meal, I think that's not so bad, until I realized that I'm having 3 or 4 servings in every single glass of milk. And he's like, dude, like it's eye-opening, and allowing clients or people to learn firsthand, okay, like these are the good things that I'm doing. These are the bad things. Like this has more calories, or this has more fat, or this has more protein than I thought. They learn without actually, it's like passive and active at the same time, where they inherently become aware of their choices. And like you said, it entices them to want to learn more. Like, if these are the things I didn't know before, what is everything else I need to learn, right? And allowing them to kind of, it's like allowing the kid to go out and play in the sandbox for the first time and get their hands on the tools and experience things. It's a great way to allow people to intuitively learn on their own, as opposed to just saying, okay, like this is the diet, this is what we're doing, this is how we're, do you ever take an approach like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had, because, I work with a group. So I do sort of, I do RP coaching. And then with my own coaching, I take a little bit of a different approach because I'm working with sort of a different population. And the folks who are coming to me quite often are, um, I guess for lack of a better word, just a little bit burnt out on, the long-term dieting, or they've had kind of, negative experiences with macro counting and things like that. And so quite often initially we'll just say, okay, let's look at, your habitual diet and just look at your habits, patterns, and correlations with, what you're feeling throughout the day. And then when you're eating, and even just looking at things like, are we eating when we're hungry or not? Are we noticing hunger throughout the day? That's something that quite often people sort of ignore, especially if they're kind of, really long-term counting things, is that they might be eating on a specific schedule rather than eating in response to hunger and then stopping just when their satiety signals kick in, as opposed to, eating all of my macros and then the plate is empty. And then from there, once they want to start tracking, if that's something that they want to do, then yeah, it's usually, okay, let's start just by seeing what you're doing in a week. Or, when we're working with one-to-one clients on RP, we have a sort of a baseline estimate for, this is probably what you need in a week. Just eat this and just see what happens with your weight, rather than saying like, this is what you need to eat and it's going to be like this forever. So the first couple of weeks, it's all just kind of collecting data. And it's really fun to see clients, especially who are going out to eat, that are then like, oh, wow, I went, I got this meal from, a restaurant. I talk about health halo with them a lot. And it seemed like it was going to be so quote unquote healthy. And the salad was 800 calories. And that's about half of what I eat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those, if, working with clients that travel a lot or go out to eat a lot. And one of the things I tell them is like, one, what we need to do is plan in advance, figure out where you're going, and then look at the menu. Now, especially if it's a chain, even some smaller places, they'll provide their nutritional value and caloric content on their website somewhere. And it really allows you to make informed decisions. And then from there, right, when you've selected something already in your mind that you've picked it out, you're much more likely to actually follow through with that decision, as opposed to just going there, looking at the menu and be like, oh, well, I think this is going to work, right? But it's the next step after picking out whatever food you want to have when you eat out. It's to, before you even eat the food, know that you've eaten that food. So plan the rest of your calories around that. So let's say you have 2,000 calories to play with in a day, and this meal is going to be 1,300 calories. You don't have 2,000 calories for your day. You have 700 calories for your day to work with at that point, right? Maybe a couple protein shakes or a salad or something like that. So we set aside the bulk of the calories for that meal, right? With, oh my God, I can't think of her name. Professional bodybuilder. I don't know if you've this Snickers diet case study. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but this was.
Was that Sohi that did that, or?
I don't.
I want to say was it the Snickers bar a day, like during prep?
Yep. That was the Snickers diet was, a 12 or 16 week prep, where what she did every single day, because she wasn't eating the same thing every single day, is she took the calories out for the Snickers bar and removed that from her total every single day. So, I mean, it's the same thing, right? I don't actually have this amount of calories. I actually have this many calories because I'm going to eat this every single day, and I plan the rest of my diet around that one meal, right? And I think is a great way to go about that. But a particular experience I had with a client, she went out to a local restaurant. It's called the Distillery, and she's like, I did really good. Like I waited just to have that one meal at night, and I had their buffalo chicken salad. I went into the nutritional information on the website provided, and I was like, okay, did you have it grilled or deep fried? She's like, okay, it was breaded. I was like, sauce on the side or on it? Like, did it have croutons? Did it have this and that? And like, as more and more ingredients she said yes to, I think the salad ended up coming out to about 12 or 1,300 calories for the salad at the end of the day. I mean, and for her, she probably went into that be like, oh, it's a salad. It's got to be 500 calories or less or something like that, you know. But in fact, it was, 2 to 3, closer to 3 times the amount of calories as she expected. So, before I transition into the next segment here, because I asked on Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff, about behavior modification. So I have a laundry list of questions,
Awesome.
people want to address, and I'll bring up with you. Is there any specific point of behavior modification or coaching that you'd like to bring up?
That I'd like to what?
Bring up or discuss.
Oh man, I think I'm trying to think of it's all so important. So in terms of, behavior modification, I think one of the questions that's hardest to answer, we talk a lot about the types of behavior modification that are so effective, or the types of habits that are so effective for long-term weight maintenance, which are, exercising for at least an hour a day, self-monitoring weight regularly, eating a sort of having an idea of caloric intake, and they estimate caloric intake between 15 to 2,200 calories a day, looking at different cohorts around the world, and having a relatively stable dietary practice, Monday through Friday and Saturday and Sunday. So you're not, having big fluctuations on the weekends. So those are all habits that are associated with long-term weight loss maintenance set out by the National Weight Control Registry when they look at these successful weight loss maintainers. But we're still not entirely sure why some individuals tend to maintain those habits and others don't. So that's one of the big unanswered questions, that even though we kind of know what is effective for long-term weight management, which I think is maybe more important than, just the short-term weight loss, that's one of the sort of unanswered questions.
My immediate guess would be environment, right? And this may seem like counterintuitive to a lot of people who may be listening to this, but I personally feel that the people that are most likely to sabotage your progress is going to be your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your wife, your husband, your kids. It's going to people you care about the most that are going to do the most damage to you, right? Because they're not doing this insidiously, right? They're not doing this on purpose. It's, this tastes good, you should eat it, or come on, it's just a drink. It's your best friends that will continuously, and your family, your loved ones, that will be the downfall of most dieters, right? I mean, yes, we have to be self-accountable, but it goes to show that there's a certain level of disrespect. And again, they aren't actively, right, going out to try and sabotage you, but to a certain level, it is disrespectful to say, for me to be, I'm on a diet, but then the person you live with says, well, I'm going to go ahead and eat this anyways, and taunt you with it, just to make fun, right? And they don't realize the profound damage that does to the person next to them, that one bite leads to 2 bites, or over time, it's just, okay, well, I'm going to skip this one meal because my friends or my family or whoever, my significant other, is pressuring me to eat this because it tastes better, right? I wholeheartedly believe that idea. If you're around people that completely support you and don't tempt you, you're going to be far more successful long term, rather than being the only person in a family trying to diet, right? How much harder is it for that person to maintain long term if they're the only one that's trying to improve themselves, right? Or the person, and this is a conversation I had with a client, which made me incredibly angry. The boyfriend would actively make fun of her for trying to eat healthy or going to the gym. And to me, what that is, that screams insecurity. I don't like the fact that you're trying to better yourself, because it's on a passive level, makes me feel bad about myself.
Mm-hmm. So I will, I don't disagree with that, but what I want to do is flip it.
Okay.
Because we talk a lot about, and environment definitely plays a role. I mean, we have the whole, like, socio-ecological model of health. But what we often fail to, we're trying to, and we talk a lot about controlling the external environment. So controlling the food environment, and that is one of the behaviors that's associated with long-term weight maintenance. So, putting really high palatable foods out of reach and things like that. But what we really want to do is work on the internal environment, so that in the times when we cannot control our external environment, which is pretty much all the time, that we have enough fortitude internally to say, I really appreciate you offering me that pizza or whatever, but I just don't want any of that. Or to have food readily available, chocolate or cereal or any food that you think might be a trigger, and you say, I can really have that food at any time. I'm not hungry right now, and it's, I would be only eating because I'm feeling emotional or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do something else instead, and I'll wait until I'm hungry, and then I might want to eat that, but I might want to eat something different because I have specific goals. And so if we work on that internal environment, then we can be in charge of our decision regardless of what's going on in the external environment. So you could be at a buffet and just say, like, I might eat until I'm satisfied, because why would I eat to the point of being sick? The food's not going to taste any better, and then I'm just going to feel really crummy, and it's going to reduce my enjoyment of the meal. So I think that a lot of, and even when we're looking at like controlled feeding studies, when we look at the buffet effect, or when we look at ingestion of hyperpalatable foods, we're looking at an approach that is ad lib, that people can, they have nothing else that they can do, no other distractions. There's really nothing else they can do except sit in this room and eat until their heart's content. But are they doing that with intention? Are they doing that having, a good relationship with food and with themselves? Maybe not. And maybe if you put a group of people in there that were like Buddhist monks or something that, were like, had worked on that internal fortitude, they'd be like, I'm just going to eat a little bit of this and I don't really need the rest. And so that's where I think, and that brings me to, that was my realization when you were talking. I was like, oh, this is the most important part of coaching for behavior change, is that we help people realize that they cannot control their external environment, and they can't even really control outcomes entirely, because you could be on a great trajectory to lose weight, and then all of a sudden like something horrible happens and maybe you don't get to that goal, or God forbid, like you lose a body part and that's why you reach your goal. That wasn't the intended outcome. But that we can control I don't want to say control, but we can regulate our internal environment, and we can make choices regardless of what the external environment is doing. And it is definitely much more challenging if we're in a very tempting and food environment, or if we have that social pressure. But that just means, okay, like maybe we can just work harder on the internal, I mean, the grit that humans can muster, that humans can survive, incredible tragedies. Like, probably if we gave a concerted effort, we would also be able to handle tempting food environments and social pressure.
Yeah, no, valid points. Absolutely valid points. So let's get into some of these questions here. Now, first question is how this reminds me of like the best advice and the worst advice you can ever give someone, because it's that, like, eat less and do more, right? And that's basically what this question is how do I become motivated to move more and do less impulse eating, right? It's so simplistic, but so like vague at the same time. I mean, like, is this just a simplistic approach, or I guess how does somebody take the first step towards, step one?
Yeah. So that's where, I think where we're thinking of, like, how do I have more motivation or more willpower, shifting to a place of different motivation. So finding your big why. So if you were to make whatever change this is, who would it affect? How would it affect them? And years from now, how are things going to be different? That's what I ask when people are like, I don't feel motivated. I'm like, okay, well, let's look for a better source of motivation. because sometimes just having abs is short term might be strong motivation, but take it out a few weeks later and you're like, in the moment, you're able to be like, I don't really like, no one's going to see my abs right now. So, I'm just going to eat whatever. So finding, I think, a stronger source of motivation is one thing. And then finding the easiest, most enjoyable, like smallest effective, the minimum effective dose of just your next meal. Like, what can you eat some vegetables? If you're not eating any vegetables, can you go for a walk? It doesn't have to be a complete overhaul, because that's where it's like, oh my gosh, this is, anyone who's done an advanced degree, it's like, oh my God, it's going to be 4 years. I have to do this for 4 years or 5 years. Just take it a day at a time or a meal at a time. And with something like impulsive eating, there might be an emotional aspect there, and that definitely gets to the mental health aspect.
Yeah, I mean, that leads me right into the next question. Someone asked, how do I stop myself from eating when I'm bored? Right, and it's not stress, but I mean that is a mental question again, right? Like, so this person, what? Like, is this go for a walk? Is this reading a book? Like, I guess, does this fall in line of what do you like to do and fill it when you're bored, or how would you approach that?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's an excellent book called "Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat" by Michelle May, and she talks about many things, but this whole program is about mindful eating. And one of the first questions, and it seems so straightforward and so basic, but quite often I don't think we're stopping to ask ourselves this question, but am I hungry? If the answer is no, you still could make the choice to eat if you want to, but you could also make the choice to do something else instead of eating that will better meet your needs. Because when we're eating because we're bored or we're feeling stressed or lonely, we're going to need a lot of food to try and meet that need, because food is not really actually going to meet that need. That's why we take so much. Like, when we're bored, we'll just snack endlessly. It doesn't really make us that much less bored. So yeah, absolutely. Find something else that is exciting to you that's also different from what you might do while you're snacking. So if your snacking is often aligned with, you're watching a TV show and you're snacking, maybe, the TV show, you could try to do the TV show without snacking, but it might be a little bit hard to break those stacked habits. You might instead find something that takes you out of that environment until you start to build up those capabilities of managing your boredom and your emotions in other ways. And there are so many other fulfilling things, like reading or going for a walk or like playing a game or calling your grandma, because most of us are not, and myself included, we're not calling our relatives enough, but finding things that are feeding you in other ways. And so sometimes what I'll use with clients, I'll be like, okay, if you want to have a snack, you ask yourself, am I hungry? Okay, I'm not hungry. I don't need a food snack. But what do you want? Do you want like a sleep snack, which is a nap? Do you want a movement snack, which is to go for a 10-minute walk? Do you want a love snack, which is to reach out to someone that is special to you? Do you want a touch snack, which could be, use your imaginations, but there's physical touch involved in that. So there are a lot of different snacks that we might have that are fulfilling to us in ways that food cannot be fulfilling.
I like that. I like those variations of the snack. I dig it. I dig it a lot. All right, so we have another question here. Let's see. It's someone, they don't have, or at least they claim they don't have the time to eat breakfast, and they're waiting so long in the day that they're becoming dizzy, right? And I know what my answer would be, and it's like if time is a limiting factor, right? Like, we have to find things that are convenient, right? Convenient that still can still give us some nutritional value, right? Like, convenient food isn't always going to be the best food, right? But what's like, do you have a go-to meal or a go-to protocol for someone who says, well, I just don't have time to eat? Like, what would your suggestion be?
Yeah, I asked them, well, first we can kind of look at like, well, what is your schedule? Obviously, number one, validate, empathize. Like, we've all been there where the day just gets away from us, and then all of a sudden, like, your stomach is eating itself. So then second is, where do you find that you have any time during the day that you could either get a grocery delivery, because this is sometimes, we're thinking of just time, but time and money kind of equivalent. So if you don't mind spending, the $5 to get a grocery delivery and it saves you a lot of time, then absolutely invest in something like that. Or do you have any time to prep ahead of time? If there's no prep time, that's okay. Then we're going to go for, what kind of foods do you like that you can get in a package? Are there any protein bars that sound good to you? Could you just have a protein shake and a piece of fruit? Because if you have just powder, that can sit out anywhere, and fruit is easy to have on the go.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty similar to the stuff that I, question people with intent to reach a goal. If people are traveling, it's kind of the same stuff. And I live, out of hotel rooms and stuff often. So I think, have the benefit of a lot of experience eating on the go and eating packaged foods and things like that. And I think it also helps us to sort of remove that health halo or the, I don't know, like the privilege of like, oh, it should be something that you cook at home and so on and so forth. Like, no, everyone can have access to nutritious foods. Everyone can, follow a diet that helps them meet their goals, even if you don't have time. And sometimes you really won't have time. And I validate that. I don't really agree with people who are like, oh, you just have to make the time. Like, sorry, if you're a mom with, 2 jobs and 5 kids, I can't even imagine. And I'm not going to be like, it's not worth it to you, it's not important enough to you. Like, let's not do that. Let's just come from a place of empathy and help. And like, how can we make this easiest for you?
Absolutely. Okay. So, this is going to be the last question here because we're running out of time. But we've talked a lot about nutrition so far. But this question actually has to do with lifting, and I appreciate this question. This person asks, how do I stop myself from being emotionally attached to certain types of lifting or routines? Right. So this is a pretty interesting question, right? Like. We can make the argument that there are. I quippingly gave a response that maybe some exercises are worth getting emotionally attached to. Deadlifts are life, right? That was my response. But in a serious question, right? Like, it sounds like maybe this person is falling into that black and white category that like these are the things that I need to do and these other things don't work, right? Like how would you go about suggesting this person to start to broaden their horizons?
I want to say I'm emotionally attached to benching, and I am like totally devastated right now because I have this weird shoulder thing going on. I haven't been able to bench, and I hit like a crazy volume PR. So right before it happened, I totally relate. When this is really an interesting one. And, it's so funny because when we talk about like emotional eating, it's kind of like, oh, we should have no emotion tied to food and things like that. But realistically, yeah, we have emotion tied to food and we have emotion tied to training, and we have to validate that. But at the same time, one misconception that a lot of people have about, mindful eating or intuitive eating, and I don't mean, in eating intuitively, I mean the process of intuitive eating, is that it's sort of an emotional, like we're eating when we feel emotional and we're eating for those emotions. It's not the case. That really we are removing emotion, as a guiding factor in why we're eating, and that we are eating in response to physiological cues, and recognizing that emotion can certainly have an impact. And it probably behooves us to do the same thing with training, that yes, we're going to be attached to some exercises, and that's great. That means that we really intrinsically enjoy that. But at the same time, we may want to consider that it may not serve us to have an emotional approach to lifting, and that we may benefit from taking a scientific approach to lifting, or we listen to our bodies and we auto-regulate because, yeah, we might want to ego lift that day, but if we're feeling a little bit of like a shoulder thing, maybe it's not a good idea. And it's the same thing when we are talking about nutrition, responding to hunger and satiety signals in training, we're responding to the interoceptive signals that we're getting during lifting. What feels right? What feels off? Am I going to, do I have a good mind muscle connection, pump, and things like that? So, emotions can really help with drive and motivation, but at the same time, you probably can, if you take a step back and look at long-term, what's best for me, maybe not the emotional approach, but maybe a little bit more of a reasoned approach, that keeps that in mind.
Yeah. That is going to do it for us today. Gabrielle, thank you so much for being on the show again. It's always a pleasure. I value your time, as do our listeners and viewers. So before we go, let everyone know where they can find you.
Yes. They can find me bouncing all around the southwestern United States for the next few months. So keep an eye out on Instagram because I'll be posting where I am. But they can find me on the interwebs at Vitamin PhD on Instagram and Facebook. VitaminPhDnutrition.com is my website with my list of podcasts and various lectures and videos that they can watch. And then also RenaissancePeriodization.com. So reach out. I try to answer everyone. And these were awesome questions. I really, really enjoyed this. And thank you so much for having me.
That means a lot to me to hear that. For someone of your prestige to find value in our content is very reassuring. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we will see you on the next time. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.